Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to introduce and invite my next guest to share all the well of wisdom that she has. This is Amy MacDonald. Amy MacDonald is local. So again, yes, she braved the icy weather to come on out to my home.
A couple streets over.
Yeah, everything's really close here. So I just want to say a little bit about Amy because there's so much to say. I'm going to read her professional bio in a moment. But it was really cool how we met. I was hosting a meditation circle at a local yoga studio, and I always have had this intention that whoever comes is the right person to come. So I could have a room of like 500 people, or I could have a room of one person. And I decided this, like, if I'm going to be meeting people in person, I have to have, like, it's not bigger or better. Whoever shows up is who's meant to show up. So one week only Amy came, and I was like, sweet, this is my one person. I wonder what's going to happen here. And it's been incredible. Just your book recommendations alone for me have helped me so much with something that I constantly am working on, which is weight stigma, my food insecurities, all those things like that. So we've done a couple events together, some like body acceptance events. And so I just feel so spoiled because you are incredible. But so let's hear her bio because it's amazing. So Amy MacDonald is a master's trained registered dietitian. She has become an impassioned advocate for social justice issues, including food insecurity, weight stigma, and weight discrimination. Amy likes to acknowledge her white, cis, hetero, class, professional, and thin privilege and aims to practice anti-oppression and anti-racism in her work and life. She practices from a weight-inclusive paradigm called Health at Every Size and hopes to make the world a more radically accepting and compassionate place. And I totally feel like you are doing it.
Well, thanks, Shannon. This is a new format for me, so we'll see how I do. I'm used to having notes and I'm used to having slides, and so this is a little bit of an adjustment for me, but I think I've really enjoyed the talks that I've been able to sit in and listen on. I missed some because I had kids climbing on me wanting help with Lego, but it was good. So as Shannon said, I'm a dietitian, and I like to describe myself as a non-diet dietitian. I had the pleasure of getting to know Shannon through our mutual friend, Claire, and our mutual love of yoga, and my practice of learning to meditate, because I'm definitely not an expert at that. But when Shannon first told me what she did for a living, I wasn't sure what to think. My backstory is that I decided to study food and nutrition because of science. I was interested in organic chemistry and biochemistry and microbiology and physiology. And because I really wanted to understand how things work. So I'm a little bit of a skeptic at heart. But what I've found is over the last 6 years of studying and 10 years of practicing, that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And we don't know everything that there is to know. Oftentimes what we thought we knew wasn't quite wasn't quite accurate. And other times it was completely wrong. We study science and practice healthcare in silos, and I think that's part of the challenge that makes it really difficult for us to get out of that, those ideas that we don't know everything. So I've actually been listening to on audiobooks to a lot of Brene Brown's work, and I'm not religious, so it took me a little while to get into her work because I was a little uncomfortable with the way she talks about God and church. But when I started to listen to more ideas about Buddhism, trying to learn more about meditation, and then I heard Brené's explanation of spirituality and intuition and faith, I really thought, this makes sense to me. So in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, she says that spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. And wow, right? She defines faith as a mystery where we find the courage to believe in what we cannot see and the strength to let go of our fear of uncertainty. And what I really love about that is that science isn't in opposition to faith. Faith is not counter to science or reason. Scientists can actually be quite comfortable with uncertainty. And as I have become more comfortable in my work and in my life, I've become more comfortable with uncertainty and intuition. And Dr. Brown defines intuition as not a single way of knowing. It's our ability to hold space for uncertainty and our willingness to trust the many ways we've developed knowledge and insight, including instinct, experience, faith, and reason. And much of what happens in our lives is outside of our direct control or even our indirect control. And although we try, we can't separate our physical selves from our emotional, mental, and spiritual selves. And what I found and quickly learned when starting my career is that not everyone has equal opportunities to influence their health through food. What works for one person may not turn out to be the best, or, at best, it may be ineffective or inappropriate, and at worst, it could be harmful. So our lives are, highly influenced by our privileges and advantages, oppressions, and marginalization that all influence the other opportunities and the resources that we have or lack in our lives. And the other thing is, we're really only now starting to begin to understand the mind-gut connection and how stress and trauma can impact us in more complicated and unpredictable ways than we previously thought possible. So much of what I learned at the beginning of my career, and what some of my colleagues learned before me, and even throughout my time in practice, which is relatively short considering. But it's changed from infant formula to eggs to margarine to allergies to probiotics. What we know and our knowledge about those things have shifted a lot over time. Likewise, what I was taught about body size has been turned completely on its head. Like most health professionals, I wasn't taught about the importance of body image or the negative impact of weight, stigma, and diet culture. And unfortunately, our schooling has yet to change enough in this area. So when I speak to groups, I often like to talk about the example of the Minnesota Semi-Starvation experiment. During World War II, they recruited conscientious objectors to the war to participate in a study to learn about the impact of starvation and refeeding. And they recruited healthy, fit men who had no prior physical or mental illnesses. And the participants ate all of their meals in the laboratory setting. And when their dietary intakes were cut down to levels that are often commonly recommended by diets today, they found that the men became obsessed with food. They were reading cookbooks and recipes, things they had never done prior to this experience of deprivation. They were stealing from each other. They couldn't focus. They couldn't get along. They had significant decrease in their endurance and ability to do the labor that they were expected to do while they were there, and significant decreases in their mental and emotional health and their social and cognitive abilities. So, and one or two of them actually had to be removed from the study. So when the men were allowed to eat again, what happened was they found they needed much more food than they had prior to the beginning of the restriction to be able to satisfy their hunger. And it took months and significant increases in their weight and body fat before they were able to regain the muscle mass and endurance that they'd lost. There was also an interesting study done, a 57-year follow-up, and so looking at how the participation in this study really changed the trajectory of some of their lives. Some of these men who'd never worried or been interested in food went on to become professional chefs or had other struggles, ongoing struggles with their eating. So this study was published in 1950, and we've known since then the impact that food restriction can have, whether it's due to captivity, food insecurity, or dieting. We don't have more recent studies because this wouldn't receive ethics approval if performed today. Additionally, there was research as early as the 1960s that looked at the negative impacts of weight stigma. Unfortunately, at the same time, the medical community started pushing weight control as a means to improve health. So at the same time as we were learning about the harms of dieting and weight stigma, we were also saying, oh, and you need to be thin. So fortunately, around that time, there were a group of fat activists that really started pushing for fat acceptance, and it really, from an intersectional feminist lens, trying to tackle that. And so gradually out of that work, we've a framework has been put together called Health at Every Size. And I use this in my work, and it means that I and others who use the framework reject the use of weight and body mass index, or also known as BMI, as proxies for health. And it calls for a ban on diet culture. And by diet, I mean food restriction or calorie manipulation, including through exercise for the purpose of weight control. It also means accepting and respecting the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes, and supporting health policies and practices that improve well-being, considering our physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. And ensuring that there's equity and access to health services, and that services that provide respectful care for people of all body shapes and sizes, rather than not having the same access. And it means that we need to acknowledge our biases and work to end discrimination and stigma due to weight, age, race, sexual or gender orientation, economic status, and other factors. And so health at every size, or HAES, as you may hear it referred to, is it promotes eating for well-being in a flexible and individualized way based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure rather than diet plans. And it supports engaging in enjoyable, life-enhancing movement or physical activity, and ensuring we make opportunities accessible for people of all sizes, interests, and abilities to participate in the degree to which they choose. So, unfortunately, we live in a world that really praises and idolizes willpower and control. And but what we're finding is that when it comes to body shape and size, it doesn't work, and it often causes harm. It's not directly within our control. There are environmental and biological and genetic and other reasons why our weight and shape are the size that they are. And although some people may see shifts, it's not something that we can just go do this and this will happen. And unfortunately, what's happened with our focus on weight is that more and more people are struggling with unhealthy relationships with food, movement, and their bodies than ever. Some researchers have called it normative discontent. So with our bodies, and so just the idea that poor body image is so rampant that it's become normalized, and that it's expected that people will feel badly about their bodies, which is really unfortunate. So we have evidence that trying to control our body size and shape, what happens, it tends to take over our lives and prevents us from actively participating and enjoying our lives. So how can we come back to our bodies? Our bodies are our home. They're the place that, they're that one thing we always have with us, right? How can we rebuild the connection, the trust, and the relationship with our body? And everyone's journey looks a little bit different. For some people, it might be finding a therapist or a dietitian or a colleague or a friend, or it might be finding yoga or meditation or mindfulness practice. For some people, it might mean ending or setting boundaries in difficult or unhelpful relationships. There's lots of different ways that it can appear in our lives. Often people will say, well, you're a dietitian. What about nutrition? So nutrition is a relatively new science. We don't know everything there is to know. Research isn't free from bias. The guidelines that science has provided us can be helpful, but without tuning into our bodies and our experiences, they can become unhelpful rules. Before we knew about nutrition science, we were able to rely on our instincts to tell us what and how much to eat. And evidence shows now that our brains control hunger and satiety signals based on how we're meeting our needs or not meeting our needs. And when we underfeed our bodies to try and keep our weight down, our brains and our bodies fight back. We have evidence that shows of the biological mechanisms that happen that help, that our body wants to stay in a certain range, and it will fight us. There are also studies of controlled overfeeding as well, where we see that not all bodies respond the same way to forced overfeeding and excessive calorie intakes. Everybody has a different response, and there are things that happen that are really outside of our control. It's not just how we move our bodies. And so, we've learned that intentional dietary control, or something that's sometimes called cognitive dietary restraint in the literature, can impact how our bodies and our brains function. And so, that's a big part of why Health at Every Size encourages giving up dieting. And what many practitioners find is that for people, even when they stop actively dieting and actively following diet plans, we're still highly influenced by the messages that we tell ourselves about food and eating and that we hear in the broader culture around us. And that worry and anxiety can make it hard to think and concentrate. It can impact stress hormones. It can create static, making it harder for us to pay attention to our body's internal cues and our body's needs. And I think the big thing that I have learned more than anything in the last 10 years of practice is that everything in our body is connected. We also don't live in isolation from the rest of the world. We're connected to it as well. We now have strong evidence about the importance of attachment and connection to other humans and the value of pets and being in nature and the feeling connected with our mental health and well-being, not just our physical self. And that evidence is really coming with food as well. I was lucky enough to recently participate in a retreat for the winter solstice with Shannon and some other local folks, Candace being one of them as well, and Carrie. I guess they were all here.
Everyone.
And when I got home, I read a really powerful article about Indigenous cultures, rituals around the seasons, the sun and the moon. And when I think what really resonated with me is that when we reconnect to the natural world, it can help us to build healthy routines, to sharpen our senses, and to increase our sense of connection with each other, and with ourselves, and that can be so powerfully healing. So in my world, that means giving up on rigid food rules and learning about normal and flexible eating, and how normal is like a wide range of normal. It's not this one tiny little thing. Understanding that not all bodies have been treated equitably. Some people have been treated really poorly for their body shape and size, and everybody has a different experience, and that's impacted by a lot of different things. And so for me, that means fighting for change, for positive shifts in our culture, and for banishing that type of oppression. It also means learning some self-compassion. Dr. Kristen Neff is I don't know that she's coined the phrase, but she has lots of materials on self-compassion. And I think, it's that understanding our common humanity and focusing on mindfulness over, of course, I've got my little list down here, rather than over-identification, and self-kindness versus self-judgment. And I really love how Sonia Renee Taylor is the author of a book called The Body is Not an Apology, which is one of the ones Shannon was referring to earlier. It is really amazing.
The audiobook especially, it's read by the author. It's so good.
I highly recommend it. And so she encourages radical self-love. And because when we learn to get back to our roots and be in awe of our bodies like we were as babies and toddlers, and learn to appreciate and respect and love them, we treat ourselves better, we treat others better. And if we want to change the world, we have to change the way we view it and the people in it. And I really love her take on it. She does an amazing job. So the theme of the winter solstice retreat, that astrology talk that Shannon talked about, was connection. And I feel that emphasis on connection in my bones. Like it resonated so much. A colleague, an Alberta dietitian and yogi and embodied leadership coach, Casey Berglund, said it really well in her TED talk. Let your body lead you. We can come home to an embodied practice of connected eating and connected living, and we can have faith in our intuition and in ourselves, and use science, but remember that it doesn't know everything. There are no set rules, and it won't always be easy, but when we focus on accepting and understanding rather than fearing difference, we can really embrace connection and help us find our way. So
awesome. Wow, thank you. I don't know about anybody else, but I was getting like full body chills the whole time you were talking, because you're so powerful, and thank you so much. It's so important that you're sharing this. So we do have a question from Barbara. So Barbara asks, what social justice strategies have you found to be effective for policy change within the health sector in relation to this topic?
Ooh, that's a big one. So we're doing lots. So I'm a dietitian and I work as a public health dietitian in my role. And I have been doing a lot of work with changing the way we talk about and report on health risk and protective factors. And it used to be the norm for public health to say, you do this, do this, do this, maintain and achieve and maintain a healthy body weight. Well, what does a healthy body weight mean? It's an old and outdated concept and really not helpful, and is really the way that we've typically messaged has led to increased judgment on individuals who don't necessarily fit specific standards. And we see that too with as we've tried to focus more on understanding health equity and understanding the differences between populations. What it ends up looking like is more, oh, you're not healthy because you fit in this category. And so we're trying to make some shifts in that area. And I think a lot of it we need, some of it's just about education. And really, I think the first step is learning what our biases are and how those are impacting the way that we practice. And then looking at, from there, how can we shift the policies that affect our organization's practices. Does that answer that?
You are incredible. Barbara says, I want to thank you for all you're saying. It's like you're looking into my soul. I'm 55 and have been overweight since puberty. I've never felt good in my own skin. So this is amazing.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I think that is such a common, we have this thing where we start telling kids to worry about their weight and what they're eating for their health and their long-term well-being when they're not even ready for that type of conversation. And then what happens is we get teenagers who are going through puberty and are supposed to be gaining weight. We tell them that that's bad. And it just sets us up for a lifetime of struggles with food and body weight. And we all grow and shift in distribution of our body weight at different times. And it's just so problematic. And I'd love to see that change. So I'm really, really hoping that I would say lots of my colleagues across the province and across the country and across the globe are trying to shift this. It's slow going.
Yeah. And, I only even started thinking about, since I met Amy, which was like maybe a year and a half ago, like I was on a diet since I was like 4 years old. I don't remember this, but I would say things to my mom, like, I can't wear that dress. It makes me look fat. Like, this is where so it just hits home for me in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And once I started seeing it through this lens and I started reading the book recommendations, so I'm going to, at the end of the retreat, post an awesome book recommendations, not just about the books that we've read on this topic, but on others as well. So you'll all be getting like a reading list if you want to continue the reading, because that's important. But it's slow moving, but then it's also for me been really fast because I see it now and I see what it is. And of course, I'm not policy, I'm not that, but in my own life, it's been pretty monumental to think of where I'm at now versus where I was even a year ago.
Yeah, I watch some of my friends and colleagues, and just as we start having these conversations, they realize how much of it we see around us and how that impacts us. I have a really close colleague who's also a dietitian who's sent me this PowerPoint. She's like, I find this really helpful. And so it was a graphic she found on social media that basically said, I often thought that affirmations were dumb until I realized that I had been doing it the whole time. And really, I had been bashing myself and saying I wasn't enough and saying I wasn't good enough. But when I started to notice that and shift my approach, it really helped to, intentionally making those positive affirmations or noticing when we see something that's really harmful to us can really help make a difference in shifting her.
Awesome. Well, just lots of resonance from Tabitha. Thank you for your comment, Tabitha. Haley, high fives. Awesome. So, we can do this. We could do a whole day event on just this, obviously. So thank you so much, Amy. It's just like, I feel like with my guests, I can't put it into English how grateful I am, because thank you. And I'm so grateful just really doesn't cut it. So it's huge. And not just thank you for coming on, but thank you for what you're doing and what you're sharing. Because honestly, it's made such a difference in my life. So I can only imagine the ripple you're making for everybody else.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I have really enjoyed this so far, Shannon. It's been
Awesome.
great.
And I just want to thank you all too. And up next is Sarah Barnhart, who is a mindful movement teacher.